Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're continuing with our ongoing series entitled The New Era Face-to-Face Evaluation. And this is our fourth video in this series. And today's video is video number 2 in part 3 of this series. So let me just reiterate what we've discussed so far in this new series. This new series is entitled The New Era Face-to-Face Evaluation. And in this series, we're talking about how recent changes in the workers' compensation system, as those changes affect qualified medical evaluators, how those changes have necessitated and demanded a change in the way qualified medical evaluators proceed with their QME evaluations. And specifically, because of dramatic reductions in reimbursements in the remunerations for qualified medical evaluators reports, it's now necessary that QMEs get to the point, get in the evaluation, get out of the evaluation, get back to the office, and punch the report out in the most efficient and time-effective manner possible. So, in session 1 of this program, we talked about how to establish the type of evaluation that you're involved with. Knowing the type of evaluation in advance allows you to be focused, targeted, and directed when you actually get in front of the examinee so that you can get to the point, get the information that you need, and get out of the evaluation as quickly as possible in order to preserve your hourly rate of approximately $250 per hour. In the second session of this report, of this new series, we talked about how to establish the tone of the evaluation when you get with the injured worker so that not only are you focused, targeted, and directed, but also your examinee is with you and is focused and is directed in getting the information to you and getting the questions posed to them answered in an efficient manner so that you can get out of the evaluation with the information that you need and not waste unnecessary time, effort, and energy that we're simply not getting paid for in the new era. Then in our last video, the video number 1 of part 3 of this new series, we began talking about how to quickly assess the credibility of your examinee in the face-to-face evaluation. And I posed to you a series of procedures as to how to proceed in the context of an examinee who has high credibility, an examinee who has modest credibility, and an examinee who has low credibility. For examinees that have high credibility, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the evaluation as per normal protocol. For examinees with low or no credibility, we're going to abort abort the evaluation as soon as possible and simply provide the opinions and conclusions in our report based upon an examinee with low credibility. And I established for you the precedent in actual legal cases and actual case law wherein judges have upheld qualified medical evaluators' opinions for either no AOE COE, no permanent impairment, or no apportionment to the industrial injury in those cases where the qualified medical evaluator determined that the examinee had low credibility. So if you determine that examinee has low credibility, the examinee is not sincerely participating in the evaluation, what good is it to go through a lengthy examination procedure when the examinee is not sincerely providing their best effort during physical examination? What value is it of extensively interviewing the examinee about their limitations to activities of daily living when the examinee is not sincere? So, in those cases where the examinee has low credibility, you can simply abort the evaluation at the 20 to 25 minute mark. You'll still comply with the legal requirements of the face-to-face evaluation, but you'll get out of the evaluation without unnecessarily spinning your wheels and wasting all kinds of time for which you're not going to get paid when the examinee is not sincere. So in our last session, we talked about how to assess examinee credibility by focusing on the nonverbal aspects of their communication. And we admitted that simply focusing on an examinee's nonverbal indicators of communication is not a 100% foolproof or reliable method for discriminating between truth tellers and liars. In fact, focusing simply on nonverbal communication aspects seems to provide only slightly better than chance percentage of success in discriminating between truth tellers and liars. But when we combine nonverbal aspects of examinee communication with verbal aspects of examinee communication, then the discriminatory power of our assessment exceeds 70, 80, and even 90% success in successfully discriminating between truth tellers and liars. And so in today's session, this is session B, part B, of our quick assessment of examinee credibility. In today's session, I want to focus on examinee verbal aspects of communication. Now, it's interesting, I have spoken on this topic before, and I remember recently speaking for the Chiropractic Association, and I'm a chiropractor by specialty. And I was recently speaking for the Chiropractors Association in a QME relicensure seminar, and the topic of examinee credibility came to the syllabus, and we got into the discussion of examinee credibility. And as I introduced some of the topics and began exploring issues related to examinee credibility, I started to notice heads in the audience nodding, heads nodding. And heads were nodding in acknowledgement that these doctors had experienced some of the phenomena that we were exploring and discussing. And doctors were nodding their head in recognizing and realizing that they themselves had had experiences where they themselves as evaluators had questioned their examinees' sincerity. And in discussing these topics with the doctors, it became apparent to me that many doctors, probably 100% of the doctors in attendance at this lecture, had at one point or another, had concerns regarding their examinees' credibility. Now, what was interesting is that it also became clear that doctors were poorly able to describe what it was about their examinee that made them concerned for their examinee's credibility. They were quite unable as a group to articulate what it was that stood out, what it was that was suspicious, what it was that was inconsistent, what it was that they found incongruent with their examinee. In other words, doctors could spot incongruities when they were present, but the doctors were poorly able to articulate what it was that was incongruent. In other words, they could feel it. They could detect the presence of inconsistencies, insincerities, and incongruities, but they were not well trained in being able to elaborate or articulate exactly what those inconsistencies were. So the doctors were aware of the inconsistencies. They simply weren't able to get a handle or a grasp on exactly what it was about the examinee that made them suspicious. Well, in these two lectures in this new series, we're talking about exactly what those incongruities, what those inconsistencies, what those eyebrow-raising factors are. And we're finding these suspicions in the nonverbal and in the verbal aspects of the examinee's communication. Now today we're going to focus on the verbal aspects of the examinee's communication. Now, many doctors don't do this, but you could do this. You could do this. You could do what criminal and forensic interviewers do when they sit down face-to-face with a suspect, with a perpetrator, with a victim even, is they sit down face-to-face and they go through a series of questions and they record the suspect's or the perpetrator's statement. They take a electronic recording of the statement. And what they do with that statement is they take that statement and they create a transcript of the statement so that they have a word-for-word transcript of the perpetrator's statement. Well, then what happens is experts in deciphering and decoding the statement pore over the statement with a fine-tooth comb and they code the statement. The process that they go through with these written transcripts is called coding the statements. And they code the statements looking for various differences in the way truth tellers and liars communicate. It seems that the processes involved in telling the truth and the processes involved in lying are emotionally and cognitively different in the mind of the interviewee. And those differences can manifest themselves in the content of the written verbal transcript that can then be coded by coding experts. Well, we could do that in the qualified medical evaluation. Now, very few doctors actually record the entirety of the interview with the examinee, but you can come close to that by creating your written transcript on your computer or on your laptop as the examinee speaks to you in the face-to-face evaluation. And you can take that written history as it's given to you by the examinee and review that history and go through some coding of your own of that statement to look for clues and cues to deception through the verbal statement of your examinee. And in today's discussion, I want to share with you some of the verbal cues and clues to deception that we can adopt into the qualified medical evaluation from criminal and forensic interviewing techniques. So this is going to be a fascinating and practical discussion for you. And the purpose of this discussion, again, as we go back to the thesis of our current series, is to allow you to quickly assess your examinee's credibility. And if your examinee is high credibility, moderate credibility, and low credibility, based upon your assessment of them, you know exactly which direction to quickly take the evaluation and quickly bring this evaluation to a conclusion, whatever your examinee's credibility, so that you can get in and get out of the evaluation and not lose time and money based on the current remuneration rates set by the Division of Workers' Compensation. So for today's discussion, I've provided you with a couple of references. I want you to go ahead and retrieve those references so that you can follow along with your own eyes as we discuss key findings of these important studies. And I'm going to obtain the references myself, and I look forward to being back with you here in just a few moments as we continue our new series entitled The New Era Face-to-Face Evaluation. And today we're talking about the assessment of examinee credibility through assessing the verbal cues to deception in the face-to-face evaluation. So we'll be back with you here in just a very few moments. Okay, I'm back with you now and have my references here. I hope you have your references as well so that you can follow along with me. And today we're talking about verbal cues to deception in the face-to-face evaluation with your examinee. And I have a couple references, one of which you'll recognize here as the AMA Guides 5th edition. I have a couple citations from that book I want to share with you. I also have an excellent book here. I'm not sure how many of you have this particular book. This is called the Clinical Assessment of Malingering and Deception. This is the 3rd edition by Richard Rogers, who is, I believe, a psychologist. He's a prolific writer on the topics of malingering and deception and detecting malingering and deception with your examinee. And then I have 3 studies which are going to form the basis of today's discussion. And we're going to go over these studies ever so quickly. The first one is entitled Criteria-Based Content Analysis. Criteria-Based Content Analysis in the Statement Credibility Assessment. So taking your examinee's statement and assessing the credibility of the statement through a process known as criteria-based content analysis. Another study that I have for you is entitled Reality Monitoring. And reality monitoring is another form of assessment of analyzing your examinee's statement for cues and clues to truthfulness and cues and clues to deception. And then finally, our 3rd study, this is a study published in the Journal of Legal and Criminologic Psychology. This is entitled Exploiting Liars' Verbal Strategies by Examining the Verifiability of Details. So we're going to talk about these 3 different methods used to assess our examinee's statements. So let's begin. Let's begin with the rhetoric question that pervades this entire discussion, and that is, do examinees, or is it possible that examinees could lie to us in the face-to-face evaluation? Is that something that we should even be concerned about, or is that topic too heavy? Is that topic too grave? Is that topic too controversial for us to even discuss in an open exchange discussion like this? Well, you may feel that it's a taboo topic, or you may feel that it's too controversial to discuss, but let me tell you something. The AMA guides, they don't consider it to be too taboo of a subject to discuss. In fact, this is fascinating. If you look at the AMA guides has 18 chapters. 18 chapters. And all throughout the 18 chapters, they go through every body system and every body region in the entire body. And they teach us in chapters 1 through 18 how to do a permanent impairment evaluation and how to assess for permanent impairment of all these different body regions and body systems. There's 18 chapters. Now, amazingly, and this is just, I don't know if this is by design or if this is a twist of the author's humor or what, but in the very last chapter of the book, which is chapter 18, there are 7 sections in chapter 18. And they go through various things. Well, the very last section in the very last chapter of the book is a section entitled Malingering. It's section 18.7 in the AMA guides. It's right here. This is the very last section in the very last chapter of the book. It's almost as if the authors of the AMA guides are telling us in this section, they're telling us, okay, now that you know everything there is to know about providing for permanent impairment ratings for every single system and every single body region of the body, now that you know that, before you go out into the world doing your permanent impairment evaluations, there's just one little thing that you need to know. And they go into that in the very last section of the very last chapter of the book. It's titled Malingering. And in this section of chapter 18, the AMA guides tells us, through their references in the bibliography of chapter 18, they tell us that some of the examinees that you're going to encounter may not tell you the truth. Some of the examinees that you encounter may have an external incentive to exaggerate. Some of the examinees that you're going to encounter, they tell us, the AMA guides tell us, may malinger, may stretch the truth, tell half-truths, may outright lie to you in order to obtain benefits. Now, the AMA guides is not about the workers' compensation system, although we've adapted it for California workers' compensation. So the inference in the AMA guides is that in our system, in California workers' compensation system, examinees may lie to us for the purpose of obtaining workers' compensation benefits. Imagine that. Well, the AMA guides tell us through one of their references that as many as 50% of examinees, that's 1 in 2, that's every other, as many as 50% of examinees believe that it's okay, it's acceptable behavior, it's okay to lie on compensation claims. Now, in the AMA guides, they're not specifically referring to workers' compensation claims. They're referring to compensation claims in general, such as Veterans Administration claims, Social Security disability claims, long-term disability claims, personal injury claims, workers' compensation claims, compensation claims. Do you get it? As many as 50%, according to the AMA guides. Well, it's my opinion, it's my experience in the current climate in California workers' compensation that the number of examinees willing to lie in order to obtain benefits in the current climate, in the new era, is even higher. It's higher than 50%. So you need to be aware of this going into your evaluation, and you need to have a system for the assessment of your examinee credibility right away, so that you can know very quickly the direction of your evaluation. Now, when it comes to deception in the face-to-face evaluation, we're going to encounter examinees who lie to us in a variety of different ways regarding a variety of different issues. So it's important that you know the dispute in question for your particular evaluation so that you can quickly determine your examinee's credibility as it relates to the dispute in question. Well, many times examinees will lie to us regarding the presence or absence of an industrial injury, in other words, AOE, COE. They will lie to us about the extent of their physical condition. They'll lie to us about the limitations in their activities of daily living. And they will lie to us in a variety of ways about a variety of issues. Well, I want to discuss one of those important issues, and it's described in this book, The Clinical Assessment of Malingering and Deception. In this book, Rogers talks about 3 types of deception. Talks about malingering, talks about partial malingering, and talks about false imputation. So let's define each of these for you, because we're going to see these. With malingering, an individual feigns a disorder that does not exist at all. Now, it's my experience that this is going to be rare, that an examinee feigns a disorder that does not even exist at all. It's rare because it's extremely difficult to lie about a condition that you have no experience with, that you have no knowledge of, that you have no actual sensation of. It would be like me trying to tell you about my trip to France and my observations of the Eiffel Tower when I've never been to France and never been to the Eiffel Tower. It's very difficult to provide credible details about something that I've never experienced. So malingering is rare. More common than malingering is what's known as partial malingering. Now, with partial malingering, an individual has actual symptoms, but exaggerates those symptoms. Now, with partial malingering, you have to be careful because you're going to find the examinee to be credible. The examinee is going to appear to you to be credible. And the reason that the examinee is credible is because they have actual symptoms. They can describe the symptoms. They can describe how the symptoms impact their activities of daily living. They can testify to you very accurately and very credibly because they're telling you about something that's actual. They actually have symptoms, but they exaggerate those symptoms for the purpose of obtaining benefits. Partial malingering. So partial malingering is something that you're going to encounter quite frequently. Partial malingering becomes important in those cases that are involving a dispute under Labor Codes 4061 and 4062, where the dispute is over the extent, the existence and extent of permanent impairment and apportionment. So examinees will exaggerate their condition in order to increase their permanent impairment rating and in order to increase the apportionment to the industrial injury. Now, with regards to disputes under Labor Code 4060, the compensability exam, we're going to see another type of deception, and it's known as false imputation. And this is fascinating. I hope I have your attention on this because you're going to see this 1,000 times. So we have malingering, partial malingering, and a new concept called false imputation. And false imputation has to do with your causation determination, with your AOE-COE determination. These are your denied cases that come to you under Labor Code 4060 for you to provide an opinion on AOE-COE. You're going to be seeing false imputation. Now, false imputation, as described here by Rogers, is the act of imputing, such as attribution, such as ascription, such as accusation, such as insinuation. It's the false imputation occurs when an individual attributes symptoms to an etiologically unrelated cause. It's the attribution of actual symptoms, so like partial malingering, there are actual symptoms, to a cause consciously recognized by the individual as having no relationship to the symptoms. In the workers' compensation system that we see in California, it's not uncommon for an examinee who has a bad knee, he already has a bad knee, to find a way to fall out of the dumpster at work and falsely ascribe the actual knee pain symptoms to a cause unrelated to those symptoms, which is a cause of falling out of the dumpster. It's falsely attributing actual symptoms to a false cause. False imputation is for the purpose of obtaining workers' compensation benefits. For example, a male client seeking to be exempted from college math courses might attribute his problems with concentration to a learning disorder rather than to daily substance abuse. So he has actual difficulty concentrating, but he attributes that difficulty concentrating not to drugs, which would provide him no benefit at all to admit, but instead ascribes that difficulty concentrating to a learning disorder for which he can receive special accommodation at college. For example, a male claimant who is aware that he is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder due to an earlier trauma may falsely ascribe the symptoms to a car accident in order to gain monetary compensation. So it's an actual condition attributed to a false cause. It's called false imputation. And you're going to be seeing this 1,000 times. And you're going to be seeing it especially in those cases that involve your denied cases. So in those cases that involve a denied case, your AOE-COE opinion is the purpose of the evaluation. You need to be able to quickly arrive at your AOE-COE determination by assessing your examinee's credibility. So, a couple more words about false imputation. False imputation is more difficult to identify than malingering because the individual can, from personal experience accurately describe the symptoms and the impact of those symptoms on activities of daily living. In other words, I hear doctors tell me many, many times, well, my examinee was very credible. They were very credible. And these examinees are very credible. Because they're speaking from personal experience about actual symptoms that they actually have. But in the AOE-COE determination, the question and the dispute does not revolve around whether or not there are actual symptoms. The dispute revolves around what is the cause of those symptoms. Okay? In addition, some individuals fail to recognize that consecutive events do not necessarily have a causal relationship, and therefore they can ascribe symptoms that have no temporal relation to any incident. And without getting too deep into this, this is the old classic example of how to make it rain outside. Isn't it true that you can make it rain outside by washing your car today? So you wash your car today and it rains tomorrow, and you conclude that washing your car causes it to rain because the washing of the car preceded the rain the next day. But actually, these two things have no causal relationship, and they're not temporally related in any way. But many individuals do not recognize this, and so they have a tendency to ascribe a false cause to their actual symptoms. Finally, false imputation often manifests as pretended depression, as pretended post-traumatic stress disorder, or as pretended anxiety disorders. All of these diagnoses are frequently the focus of disability claims, workers' compensation claims, or other civil litigation scenarios. A thorough evaluation includes searching for past trauma and past symptomology to determine the most likely cause of the symptoms. The above disorders are particularly vulnerable to malingering because of the importance of patient-reported symptoms in the diagnosis. So when it comes to patient-reported symptoms and patient-reported history and the patient's testimony, we're going to be asking our examinee a series of questions in the face-to-face evaluation, and we're going to be assessing the content of their responses for cues and clues to deception. Now, the ways that we can do that are many, and the literature describes many different techniques by which criminal and forensic evaluators assess suspect statements. And today I want to discuss three of those with you, because these are the three that have survived studies, have survived scrutiny, have survived testing, and have proven validity in discriminating between truth tellers and liars. And these particular three types of methods have immediate applicability to the insurance claims setting, such as the type of work that we do as qualified medical evaluators. So let's talk briefly here about the content, the criteria-based content analysis in statement credibility assessment. Okay? So we can abbreviate that as CBCA, criteria-based content analysis. This consists of a list of 19 content criteria that are expected to be more present in true statements compared to fabricated statements. So in other words, if you analyze a statement given by a truth teller and you compare it to a statement given by a liar, those two statements will differ in about 19 different criteria. Now, all 19 are not present or evident in every single statement, but there have been 19 different criteria that have been described by experts. Well, as far as concerns us in California workers' compensation, a couple of basic principles that can be derived from criteria-based content analysis. Number one, liars generally tell a less coherent story than do truth tellers. So if you're listening to the examinee's story and it's all over the place and does not seem to be very clear or very coherent, there may be a reason for that. Number 2, liars are less likely to make spontaneous corrections to their story. They're less likely to make spontaneous corrections to their story. For example, the examinee says, it was about 2 p.m. and I was in the warehouse and no, wait a minute. No, it was about 3 p.m. It was about 3 p.m. and I was in the warehouse. And that is a spontaneous correction. Truth tellers are prone to making spontaneous corrections, whereas liars rarely make spontaneous corrections to their story because they stick to a story that's been rehearsed. Whereas truth tellers are simply sharing the story with you spontaneously from their memory, which can require that they make spontaneous corrections. Number 3, liars describe fewer reproductions of conversations. Truth tellers, in giving you their statement, will reproduce conversations that they had with key people involved with the story. But this seems to be much, much too difficult for a liar to be able to handle cognitively and emotionally under the stress of interviewing. So you will find that their stories are devoid of reproduction of conversation. So for example, truth teller is telling a story and he says he was talking to Bill Smith, and Bill Smith told me, take off your pants or someone will get hurt. And this is a reproduced conversation from the story. Liars tend to be unable to reproduce conversations. Liars include more contradictions in their stories. Liars tend to tell their stories in a more chronologic order. For example, because they tend to stick to their rehearsed story. So truth tellers may tend to jump around chronologically as they put together and piece together the chronology of the story, but the deceivers tend to have a story that's been pre-rehearsed and pre-established to which they stick. Finally, liars are also less likely to admit forgetting certain details about the event. For example, I know he was wearing a dark blue sweater, but I don't remember the color of his pants. This reflects the statement more of a truth teller because the truth teller is admitting that he's forgotten some of the details of the story. Whereas on the other hand, a liar sticks to a pre-rehearsed and pre-established story and so will not admit to forgetting details. Will simply provide you an ongoing stream of details that have been pre-rehearsed. Okay? So these are some things that we can rely on in the workers' compensation setting. When you discuss the incident of industrial injury with the examinee and you discuss the reporting of it with their supervisor, you may assess how competent is the examinee in being able to reproduce the conversation and the interaction that they had with their supervisor in reporting the industrial injury, as an example. Okay, so that's an example of how we can apply this to the workers' compensation setting. Now, in addition to criteria-based content analysis, criminal and forensic interviewers are relying heavily on concepts that derive from what is known as reality monitoring. Reality monitoring. So with reality monitoring, this concept and these interviewing techniques originally stem from memory research and was initially used for evaluating whether a memory originated from a real experience or an imagined event. So it seems that when a person recalls a memory, if that memory is an actual memory of events that actually occurred, the description of that memory is different from the description of a memory that's contrived from cognition, a memory that's contrived from imagination, a memory that's contrived from non-actual events. The descriptions of those two memories differ. Isn't that fascinating? The rationale is that memories from a real experience arise from perception and accordingly will contain more sensory, more contextual, and more affective information than memories that originate from imagination. So memories from perception will include all of the perceptual detail, such as the times, such as the dates, such as the places, such as the colors, such as the smells. Actual memories will contain more perceptual detail than memories that are contrived from imagination. And you can analyze the statement of your examinee for the presence or absence of these details. Isn't that incredible? It's also assumed that memories of real experienced events are more vivid, more clear, and sharper than fabricated memories, which are usually more vague, less concrete, and more likely to contain cognitive operations, more likely to contain cognitive, thoughtful, contrived operations. So, what can we glean from reality monitoring as it applies to the workers' compensation interview is, number one, liars include less perceptual, such as smell, such as taste, such as sound, less perceptual, less spatial, such as the location, and less temporal, such as time and duration, information in their accounts. So let me say that again. Liars include less perceptual, less spatial, and less temporal information in their accounts. They include less details. An imagined memory has fewer details than an actual memory. Number two, liars' stories are less plausible, meaning they're less reasonable and they're less probable, than truth tellers' stories. Have you ever been sitting face to face with an examinee and they're talking and you're going, that just does not sound coherent or plausible. That's a cue and a clue for you that the examinee is constructing the description of their story from imagined memories versus from actual memories. That's a cue and that's a clue, and now that you know it, you will be able to pick up on that with your very next examinee. Now, the third approach, and I think the most practical for us in the workers' compensation setting, sort of stems from some of the findings in reality monitoring and gives us some concrete principles that we can rely on in our face-to-face interview with the examinee. And this has to do with what's known as the verifiability approach. And this has to do with the details that the examinee provides us in the face-to-face interview, the details that they provide us in their statement. We know from reality monitoring that liars include less detail, less perceptual, less spatial, and less temporal detail in their stories than do truth tellers. Well, with the verifiability approach, we're going to take a look at the details that the examinee provides us and ask ourselves the question, which of these details are details that can be verified? It seems that truth tellers and liars differ in the amount of details that they provide in their testimony. Why is that? Because with liars, it's quite difficult to come up with details for an event that actually never happened. And that makes sense, correct? Okay? So taking from this study, which is entitled Exploiting Liars' Verbal Strategies by Examining the Verifiability of Details, it seems that liars, in giving us their testimony, may attempt to avoid saying things that they think will sound suspicious. Yet this avoidance gives them away. So liars present to the face-to-face evaluation with a strategy. And here in this study, it talks about exploiting that strategy, exploiting their strategy. Well, the strategy is that they will avoid mentioning details that can be verified. Liars will provide details in their story, because isn't it true that one of the ways that we use to assess credibility is through the details? It seems that a statement that is rich in detail is more credible than a story that is devoid of detail. Well, liars have a strategy. They have a strategy. In order to sound credible, they have to avoid mentioning details that cannot be verified. They avoid mentioning details that can be verified that can then be found out to be not true. So while liars will provide details, they will avoid providing details that can be verified. This is referred to as the verifiability of details. One of the most important of verbal criteria to rely on in assessing credibility is richness of details. The richer an account is perceived to be in detail, the more likely it is to be believed. Although providing details helps to generate an honest impression, it also puts liars at risk because investigators may be able to verify some of those details and often do. So one of the things that you may want to do with your examinee in beginning your face-to-face interview with the examinee is to let them know, Mrs. Jones, I'm going to ask you some questions about your industrial injury. I want you to provide for me as many details as you possibly can, and no detail is insignificant. So I want you to provide as many details as you can. Now I want you to know that I'm going to be attempting to verify the details that you provide me through the medical records and through the administrative records that I've received from the insurance companies. So I want you to provide for me as truthful an account with as many details as possible, knowing that I'm going to be attempting to verify the details that you provide to me. Do you understand? And you get a head nod from them. And so you let them know, number one, to give you as many details as possible, and number two, to let them know that you're going to be attempting to verify the veracity or the truthfulness of the details that they give you. So let's explore this a little bit more. In legal, criminal, and forensic, and now in insurance claims interviewing, and that's the type of work that we're doing, insurance claims interviewing, truth tellers and liars can be distinguished by the amount of rich and verifiable details that they offer. And the gap between the two, the truth tellers and the liars, that gap can be opened up and exploited and magnified when the interviewer tells the interviewee in advance that they plan to verify all details to assess for credibility. This causes the truth tellers to pour on even more details. It's like the truth tellers are saying to the interviewer, they're saying, oh, you're going to verify the details I've given you? You're going to verify them? Okay. Okay, sucker. Here comes a barrage of details. And they pour on the details. Copious, rich details. But on the other hand, liars struggle. Liars struggle because they cannot come up with details that can be verified. Isn't that amazing? They can't come up with details that can be verified because the incident of injury never happened. So the gap between the two can be exploited by telling the interviewee that you're going to be assessing and verifying the details. So the truth tellers will flood you with details. And the liars will be able to provide you scant details that can be verified because there are no details that can be verified. Isn't that an amazing insight? So what are details that are verifiable in the workers' compensation setting? So we have examinees that come to us with a denied claim, AOE, COE is in dispute, And the presence or absence of an industrial injury is the dispute in question. And the examinee comes to you with their description of how the incident of injury occurred. And they're going to be giving you details. How can you verify those details? What qualifies as a verifiable detail? Well, verifiability is based on activities that can be documented and are therefore checkable. So, for example, phone calls, cash withdrawal from an ATM machine, an incident report, an accident report, a witness statement, photos, faxes, videotaping. Really, you're looking for anything that can be verified. And many times examinees come to us in the qualified medical evaluation with nothing that can be verified. They come only with their testimony. Only with their testimony. And when you realize that the examinee has no details that can be verified, it tells you immediately what direction to take this claim. Okay? You can ascertain this instantly in the face-to-face evaluation. When an examinee has no details that can be verified, you instantly know the direction of your questioning, and you instantly know the direction of your exam, and you instantly know the direction of this evaluation. This is an evaluation that's going to end up in front of the judge because the occurrence or non-occurrence of an industrial injury cannot be verified. And these cases are not resolved by the qualified medical evaluator. They're resolved by the judge. So why spend any time deliberating on this once you determine that there are no details that can be verified? Isn't that incredible? Verifiability is when the examinee says the injurious activities were carried out with another identifiable person who can be traced. Who can be traced. In the workers' compensation setting, this amounts to identifying a co-worker who was involved in the incident who is willing to come forward with a written statement. So examinees will tell you, yeah, the injury was witnessed by my co-worker, William. William was right there, and William will tell you that he saw me get injured. The next question is, well, do you have a written statement from William? Can the detail of William's witnessing the incident be verified? And 100% of times, examinees will not bring a witness statement, even though they claim that a witness was present. So in that case, that's a detail that cannot be verified. It tells you exactly which direction this evaluation is going. A verifiable detail is an incident that was witnessed by at least one other identifiable and traceable person. Records by video cameras qualify as verifiable details. And this is interesting because many times examinees will tell you, well, there were cameras. There were cameras in the warehouse where I got injured. You could get the videotaping from the cameras and prove that I injured myself. Well, in the workers' compensation setting, the law states that the burden of proof of the industrial injury falls on the examinee, not on the qualified medical evaluator. So the question to the examinee is, well, do you have a copy of the videotaping that shows the injury taking place? Can the detail of the injury being recorded by video cameras be verified? Do you have verification of the videotaping? And of course, the examinee will tell you that they have no verification of the videotaping, and you now know exactly the direction to expedite the evaluation. So let me give you an example. Let me give you a case example where we can look at the verifiability of details. And this is taken from an actual QME report. This is the history section extracted from a QME report wherein the examinee describes the incident of injury. This is a denied case. It's a case that involves injury to the foot. This is a case where the examinee did not report the incident of injury until 7 months after it was alleged to have occurred. So we have an unwitnessed incident with a 7-month delay in reporting. Already we have in place two major red flags for workers' compensation fraud. Okay? So the examiner asks the examinee, Mr. Jones, tell me what happened with your industrial injury. Mr. Jones says, this is taken right from the report, Mr. Jones described an injury which occurred on December 11, 2015. He described injury occurring in the following manner, quotes, I worked for ABC Building Services, and I get called for special events, concerts, etc. And I was at the stadium in San Francisco, and we were cleaning the 5th floor, putting garbage in a gondola. So he's giving us some introduction as to his job and his job duties and where he was and what happened. They have 2 different sizes of garbage bins. They were putting garbage into the garbage bins, those large transportable bins that are on wheels that they use to collect garbage bags, and then they take the whole bin down to the dumpster and empty the bin. So they have 2 different sizes of bins. I was going to take the filled bin downstairs because it was full. I told my coworker I was taking it down and bringing back an empty bin. So, are these details credible? Are they believable? These are believable details, right? In these details, he's telling us some factual information about his work and his workplace. So, with these details, the examinee sets up his own credibility. These are credible details. He works at such and such place. He cleans the 5th floor. He works with 2 different sizes of bins. They take the bins from upstairs to downstairs to empty them. And these are factual, credible details. This is called embedding. Herein, the examinee embeds credible, actual, factual details into an otherwise seemingly deceptive account of an industrial injury. This is called embedding lies. He then says, I pushed the bin into the elevator by myself, and it ran over my left foot. This is an unwitnessed incident. The bin weighed approximately 150 to 175 pounds. I pushed it into the kitchen elevator. It is a small elevator, and I was trying to squeeze by the bin to get in. I pushed the bin in and got in on the right side and pushed the elevator button. Okay? When I got to the bottom level, the door opened and I pushed the bin out. It was on the left side of the bin, and as I pushed it out of the elevator, there were 2 wheels on the side. As I pushed it out the door, the wheel ran over my left foot. I pushed the bin out to the big dumpster, and when I went back up, I started feeling left foot pain. I told my coworker Sandra that I ran over my foot and my toe hurts. I told her that I was going to take my break and it was time to go home. It was a Christmas event and I punched out on Monday, December 15, 2015. Now, of those details, this account is somewhat rich in details, correct? He talks about a small elevator. He talks about the weight of the bin, 150 to 175 pounds. He talks about 2 wheels, and he gives rich detail, correct? But of these details, which of these details can be verified? Can we verify that it's a small elevator? Probably. Can we verify that there's a dumpster outside? Probably. Can we verify that the wheels ran over his left foot twice? No. Those are details that cannot be verified. Can we verify that he told his coworker Sandra that he ran over his foot and his foot hurts? See, here we have a compounding of lies. Number 1, that he ran over his foot, and number 2, that he told his coworker. We're having a compounding, a stacking of lies one upon the other, of which the details cannot be verified. Can we verify that he told her that he was going to take his break and that it was time to go home? Can we verify that he punched out on Monday at such and such a time? So when you see this testimony, when you read this transcript, And when you experience this statement given to you verbally by the examinee, as a qualified medical evaluator, you want to ask yourself, which of these details can be verified? And you'll realize very quickly that there's no witness statement from Mina, there's no incident report of the bin running over his foot, there's no verified videotaping, there's not a single detail in this testimony that can be verified. And so that tells you immediately the direction to take this evaluation in, so that you do not waste time and that you do not waste money confabulating unnecessarily for activities that you're not going to be getting paid for in the new era face-to-face evaluation. So doctors, let's conclude today's discussion very simply by saying that now more than ever, the examinee credibility and the assessment of your examinee's credibility is now more important than ever, because we don't have time to waste, because we don't get paid for wasting such time anymore, whereas before we used to get paid for wasting all the time that we wanted to in the face-to-face evaluation with our injured workers. We're not getting paid for that anymore. So it's critical that we get to the point, get to the conclusion, get to the opinion, get to the bottom line quickly, accurately, and efficiently in order to preserve our hourly rate for our reports. So the examinee assessment is critical. When you determine that the examinee is credible, you can then proceed with the evaluation, get the information that you need, and get out of there. When you have an examinee who is not credible, simply conclude the evaluation and provide your opinions and conclusions based upon an examinee who has low credibility. In other words, you can opine against AOE COE if you determine the examinee is not credible. You can opine against permanent impairment, or you can provide for 0% permanent impairment when the examinee is not credible. And you don't have to worry about having your opinions or conclusions challenged, because the precedent has already been established. Judges have already been presented with opinions and conclusions from qualified medical evaluators based on low examinee credibility. And the judges uphold those opinions and conclusions because the doctor's professional opinion was that the examinee was not credible. So you can feel confident and comfortable in providing opinions and conclusions based upon low examinee credibility, and you can get out of the evaluation without spinning your wheels unnecessarily. So doctors, I hope these concepts help you. The purpose of this entire discussion is to help you become more targeted and more focused in your face-to-face evaluation. What if you had a crystal ball and you could instantly go to the bottom line and get the evaluation over with very efficiently without spinning your wheels? Wouldn't that be valuable? Well, these techniques allow you basically to have a crystal ball into the psychology of your examinee by assessing their behavior verbally and by assessing the content of their, assessing their behavior non-verbally and by assessing the content of their statement verbally. I hope I said that right, non-verbally and verbally. These are your crystal balls into the mind of your examinee. So you need to employ these techniques with your very next examinee. Now, in our next discussion, we're going to move into the history and the relevant medical history sections of the face-to-face interview with your examinee. And I'm going to show you how to tailor your interviewing questions and questioning to the exact and specific issues involved in the dispute of your case, so that you don't waste time talking about how the cow ate the cabbage and how Billy hit a home run when he was in 4th grade and all this time-wasting stuff. So for today, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's video. Look forward to being with you on our very next video as we continue our ongoing series entitled The New Era Face-to-Face Evaluation. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.